is Frank Howard. I was born in a little hamlet of Washington Lands, West Virginia, which is a small community approximately 4 miles south of Moundsville, West Virginia. I'm the son of Bill Howard, who is a West Virginia coal miner. My mother's maiden name was Anastasia Ovchinnik, who's the daughter of Russian immigrants who came through Ellis Island. Most of my childhood was pretty routine, but towards my teen years, things get rather interesting. So my early childhood was kind of routine, but I also had kind of a ornery side to me. It's typical stuff when we were kids. Teacher getting mad because we had to come to school with snakes in our pockets, or putting toads in the teacher's desk, which most teachers didn't find very amusing. Various ordinary things. Perhaps we were a little bit too smart for the common sense we had. The occasional smoke bombs in the grade school room. Oh, I don't know, a little bit of natural gas sent in a heating duct. And one of the more common ones we used to do, I remember, was every spring of the year we would eat a bunch of ramps and sent home for being high, smelling, and low down, which my mother dearly loved that one. Perhaps some of our childhood also had a little bit of a rebellious side. One case in point I remember when we were still in grade school, my mother made the comment that she said if you didn't like my rules, you didn't have to live under my roof. So as a result, being kind of the, I guess, mechanically inclined, I went to the property or the woods behind her house where we grew up and built my own log cabin. And whenever my mother went yang yang yang, so I'd just leave and go to her own log cabin. But part of that was we learned how to live off the land and hung around a lot of the old timers and learned how to eat possum, groundhogs, rabbit hunting, squirrel hunting, whatever it took to live out in the wild.
You ate possum?
Yeah. If you learn how to properly prepare it, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that, some people get the Appalachian stigma to it, but it's not bad stuff.
What does it taste like?
Tastes like possum. Like, does a frog leg taste like chicken? It's possum. So it was kind of part of the interesting childhood, but one of the benefits of that, I guess we could say, we were born with a wrench in one hand and a gun in the other, and learning self-sufficiency. Learned how to live off the land probably by the time I was 12.
The one thing I noticed, Frank, and you might not even notice anymore, but you do have an accent.
That's kind of interesting to explain, because where I grew up at, I lived a lot of life with a lot of the rural old timers, and kind of like, I guess, growing up with, memory escapes me, the Firefox books. Then also I lived in a valley and actually had proper parents and lived in the best of both worlds. Then I also, when later in life, I worked for some English gentlemen where I learned aviation. So I guess that's perhaps why my accent's 1/3 Appalachian, 1/3 Pittsburgh, and 1/3 British.
So Frank, you mentioned aviation. How did you get into aviation?
This is another bizarre thing in my life. I got in aviation driving a septic tank cleaning truck. Is how that came about. Well, I was always interested in airplanes, had model airplanes since I was a little kid. Then my boss sent me to do a septic tank across the street from the Marshall County Airport. When I was there, the lady who operated the airport said they had plumbing problems. Could I come over and help them? And I did. So as a result, to pay me, they gave me a ride in a small aircraft, a Cessna 150, and I was infatuated with that and made a little deal with myself that all the money I made, working part-time, driving a septic tank truck, spent it all on learning how to fly. So even my learning to fly stint was kind of interesting. So after I got my introductory ride, I started taking lessons. And in the meantime, I kind of had a little disadvantage learning to fly because a previous back injury, breaking my back, don't feel my feet really well. So when learning to fly, I had a hard time learning rudder control, which was how you drive on the ground, and lateral control of the aircraft. And I remember a couple peculiar incidences where learning to taxi, my instructor made me sit on my hands to drive with my feet. Then I remember him screaming at me to use my feet on approach learning to land. And the best one was learning how to fly. There's a maneuver we did called a stall, in which you pitch the airplane up to where it quits flying, then you recover. But anyhow, I spun the aircraft out, and we're spinning out of the sky, and I tried to recover it with a yoke, and it didn't work. You need to use the rudders. And I remember spinning out of the sky, and my instructor, I'll never forget, fearless John Ferryhawk, was sitting on his hand and said, "Well, you know what to do. Damn it, do it. Think about it." Well, eventually I recovered the spin, and since I was amazed with that, I got good at that and was kind of like the spin and stall king there for a while. And actually, that's what got me my aerobatic interest in aviation. But so, speaking of aircraft spins, probably the most interesting one was I was flying with an instructor of mine at 6,000 feet, which is fairly high for eastern elevation. And my instructor just was contacted Wheeling, West Virginia Tower and asked for clearance to spin in the traffic pattern. And the tower, thinking it was a joke, cleared us for the spin. Well, we actually done it. We spun the aircraft right down to the traffic pattern. And needless to say, when we landed, we were called to the tower because they didn't see the humor in that. Okay, so while we're on the subject of humorous things, when I went to high school, once our little high school furnace room caught on fire. So, being in the volunteer fire department at the time, I instinctively put out the fire. Well, our school principal didn't see the humor in that and tried to suspend me for 3 days for reckless endangerment. Well, I thought the teacher was a little bit, let's just say, an asshole. So I thought, well, all right, you got me, I'll get you back. So I used a little bit of chemistry and electronic knowledge, and I had a master key to every key in the building. So before school, I walked into his private principal's bathroom, and I wired his toilet, a little bit of explosives and a mercury switch detonator. So sure enough, he showed up in the morning, took his morning constitution. Then when we went to flush it, well, obviously the toilet exploded, and it blew shit all over him.
Well, what was the principal's name?
Well, let's just say for all intents and purposes, we called him Man Lurch.
Man Lurch.
And they apparently took it pretty seriously because they called the ambulance and they made a big deal out of it. And he's standing there covered in doo-doo getting hauled off in a meat wagon. And so apparently school pretty well knew I did that because there were kids that had to know how to do it and kids that would do it. But apparently they knew I fit both sides of the equation. So I was kind of investigated for a while with that. And needless to say, they didn't see a whole lot of humor in that either.
How did you have a key for the whole school?
Well, because when I went to school, I hung around with all crowds, as we discussed earlier amongst us, that I hung around with the janitor kids and befriended everybody. Well, I got the bright idea that I borrowed the master key from the janitor one morning, kept a clay mold in my pocket, shoved it in a clay mold with a key number. Then the next day, a friend of mine's father owned a hardware store, cast the key, then made a copy from the clay mold and had a master key to every door in the building.
So earlier you told me a story, Frank, about how you built a Jeep.
Well, since we were rural kids, we kind of, as we said earlier, grew up with a wrench in our hand. Well, we got the bright idea that we fell in love with MASH Army Jeeps and we decided to build our own. So we scrounged up a bunch of stuff from junkyard. I remember we used parts from the phone company to build frame rails out of it. 7 or 8 scrapped refrigerators for the body parts. It used an old Crosley motor, a homemade transfer case, and one childhood friend of mine was a machine and welding genius, Bobby Shuttler, and another friend of mine who was a welding genius, Danny Walton, and I was a paint and body man. Well, we put together a 3/4 scale Jeep. It was a lot of fun. I painted bright yellow, and I remember once we used to ride around in the woods with it. And one day the brakes went out of it, and we thought, oh, it's no big deal.